book of Isaiah, chapter 14, beginning at verse 12, and then one out of Revelation, chapter 12, beginning at verse 7. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning star? How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mountain of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High, yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. A war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil, and the Satan who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Here ends the reading of Holy Scripture. Would you bow with me, please, God? I stand in your presence this morning once again, Father, tempting to be a spokesman for your kingdom, Lord. I know that unless you speak, nothing happens. And so, Father, I would ask you to fill me up and to me again, but love me. I ask you, God, to take my words, make them thine, rescue me from me. For this I speak in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. I ran across a story that reminded me of a friend of mine. We used to take in school multiple exams that had multiple answers. You know, you just take a choice. And if there's at least 4 answers, or 3 or 4 answers or whatever, you just circle A, B, C, or D. And he said, you know, at least 25% of the answers are D, so 25% of the questions he would just circle D. That doesn't necessarily mean he was right. Well, Curly was kind of like that. Curly came to the university campus to take his final exams. And, of course, when he got his exam paper, he showed up in the hall, in the exam hall, took his seat, you know, and he looked over the paper and the questionnaires, and they were yes or no answers. And so Curly just took a coin out of his pocket and he'd flip it. If it landed on heads, he would mark yes. And if it landed on tails, he would mark no. And of course, you see, he finished the exam in about a half an hour. And the other students just struggling to finish. They were still at it. And all of a sudden, the monitor who was monitoring the exam noticed that he was flipping his coin and he was cursing and swearing. He just seemed to be in a tizzy. And he walked over to him and he says, well, what's wrong, Curly? He says, well, I'm checking my answers. You get the idea. You get the idea. Heads and tails don't always work, does it? Bullying. It just, I don't know. Bullying is something that's always bothered me, and it bothers all of us. We don't hear much talk about it anymore, but it's happening. It's happening on a large scale. Merriam-Webster says bullying is the attack abusively or to attack abusively and or use browbeating language or behavior. And when I reflected upon Webster's description, I realized that perhaps without us ever thinking about it, we are exposed to bullying more frequently than we know. In public media. Reporters are always bashing politicians. Politicians are always bashing each other. It's not just taking place on the schoolyards, is it? Now, we're familiar with the stories about cyberbullying. Young people attacking each other on their cell phones and on their computers, or whatever. I remember a story that just absolutely was appalling when I heard about it. You heard about it. It's been a while since the story made news. Two young ladies. One of them was attacking another one on her cell phone. Why don't you just die? Why don't you just commit suicide? Why don't you just kill yourself? And what really happened, she kept that tirade up for so long that the young lady that was the object of her bullying did hang herself. And when she was asked about it, why she did it, she simply said, I just didn't like that girl. Studies in Britain have shown that half of the suicides among young people are the result of bullying. An ABC News report some time ago reported that 30,000 young people stay home from school every day because they are afraid of being bullied. It's an epidemic. It just doesn't involve the people who are involved in it or the victims. It's a blight on society. It's costly. It's deadly. A report by the Urban Institute revealed that 17% of the students that were surveyed had been bullied at least once or twice during the year. 41% said they were abused. And 15% said they were abused at least once a day. Females generally are abused psychologically. Males reported being abused physically. Now I can go on and on with many reports. I looked at this thing and I studied. There's just reports and reports and reports out there and statistics that deal with bullying. And they're sometimes in the thousands of people who are involved or are the object of someone else's bullying. Well, the biggest bully I know of is Satan. The biggest bully I've ever heard of is Satan. Now, I have to believe that satanic influence is behind all the bullying that is taking place in our society. We may not like to hear that. We may not want to think that way, but I firmly believe that Satan has a big hand in it. The computer lists 136 different synonyms for Satan. Some of them you know about. Old Scratch. The demon, the devil, this, that, and the other. One I could not find on there was Harkinad. You know, I couldn't find it in the dictionary. I don't know where I ever heard the fact that the devil was called Harkinad. But somewhere in my life, I heard that. It's just stuck with me. He may be called anything, but satanic evil is the most destructive force in our world, and I think in the entire universe. Persons caught in his grip and who choose to stay there in his grip end up in a place in eternity that Jesus Christ described as outer darkness, where there is weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. And that phraseology has a lot to say about what heaven is like. Outer darkness. Because there's no light. The light of God does not exist there. Weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, because hell is a horrible place. The people who are there know they're there, and they know they can't get out, and they're there forever. Satan as an angel. You ever thought about that? The Bible tells us that Satan was the most beautiful angel in heaven. Lucifer is another name for Satan. God's message to his prophet Isaiah was this: take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. That's in verse 4. And you have to go there to understand everything that Isaiah is talking about in the next 10 verses. We began at verse 12 of chapter 14. Because in the Medo-Persian world, before they took control of the Babylonian Empire and the ancient world of the day, the king of Babylon decided to set himself up as a god. It's not Nebuchadnezzar. His name was Merodach-Baladan. And obviously, when Babylon fell, so did the king. And what Isaiah does here is relate the fall of Babylon to the fall of Satan, kicked out of heaven, because Satan chose to set himself up as God. He was going to set himself above God. And that's just not going to happen. Oh, Lucifer, son of the morning. In the Hebrew it goes like this: Hallel ben Shakar. Hallel means brightness or morning star. Another name for Lucifer, Satan, is day star. We're talking about a description that refers to the first light of the morning. The Greek translation of these texts of the scripture goes something like this: Eos phoros proi anatelion, Lucifer, you who made the morning rise. Here's what Paul had to say about Satan to his church at Corinth. Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light, the most glorious angel of heaven, until he got so arrogant, until he got so self-centered, until he got so into himself, that he decided that he would set himself up as a God and above God. He failed. John gives us a great description of it over in Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 and 9. Here's what John says: and war broke out in heaven. It broke out because of the bully Satan wanted to take over. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. There are 7 archangels. I'm not going to get into archangels. I can't even remember them all. I know about 3 of them. Gabriel is one we're very familiar with. He's the messenger angel. He's the one when God wants to deliver a message to us, he sends Gabriel to do that. Michael is in charge of God's army. He's in charge of all the angels. They go to war. And the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old. Serpent of old, very important phrase. Goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. The serpent that appeared to Eve in Adam, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. We'll never stop to think about that. It was always been for me a difficult concept to grasp and understand. But when I began to look at this and look at it a little closer, I began to grasp and try to understand it more. Why Satan is referred to all these different ways. Because all I want to think is an evil demon. You know a guy? 2 little horns on his head, all red, with a pitchfork in his hand. Smiling with a crooked nose. Beady little eyes. See, that's the concept we have of the Satan. You know, he could be sitting right next to you. He could be your neighbor. He could be your best friend. He comes in many forms. Our English word for Satan comes from the Hebrew word Satan, which means adversary, opponent, arch enemy of good. Now, even cartoonists have picked up on this idea of bullying in certain ways. 2 particular cartoonists, Charles Schulz, who writes Peanuts, and I forget who the guy is that does Calvin and Hobbes. In Peanuts, though, Schulz is always very careful at how he deals with violence. And by the way, violence is a form of bullying, okay? Violence is a form of bullying. And Charlie Brown's always seems to be the scapegoat, doesn't it? It's always somebody picking on Charlie Brown. Even the girls. Particularly, what's her name? I forget what her name is. But particularly her, the psychologist, Lucy. Yeah, she's always picking on Charlie Brown. But Charlie never picks back at her. But then in Calvin and Hobbes, it's a little different. Susie is as likely to hit Calvin as Calvin is to hit Susie. We call that egalitarian violence. The question is to ask, just how does Satan function? How does Satan do? I want to talk about some of the most salient methods Satan uses to attack us as a bully. First of all, stealth, slyness, and cunningness. You can put all that in one package. Stealth, slyness, and cunningness. Over in Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, the writer says, the serpent was the more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Now I have to admit, snakes just fascinate me. And I watch documentaries on snakes, but I kill everyone I can get my hand on them. You know, something that crawls on the ground has just got to be evil. Now I know there's some good snakes, okay? The black snake's very good. It eats vermin and stuff like that, rodents and stuff like that. There are some very good snakes. But there's just something, there's just a concept about seeing a snake crawl around, wiggling its way through the grass, and that's evil to me. Just conjures up evil in my mind. Paul, writing to the church at Corinth, takes up that same mantra as he warns the church and fears for their faithful well-being when he writes, I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. Craftiness, slyness. What about deceit? That's the one he used against Adam and Eve. And it is the one that he uses most commonly. Eve succumbs first, then she drags Adam with her, and when God shows up, Adam blames Eve. God could have said, well, now Adam, you could have said no, couldn't you? You could have rejected Eve's offer, couldn't you? He deceived Adam and Eve into believing that the limits that God had set upon them regarding what they could do and couldn't do in the Garden of Eden were not true. They were not real. God had lied to them. God himself knew that if they ate of that tree that they weren't supposed to eat of, that they would become gods themselves. They would become like God. They wouldn't die. And so they ate. I bet you they hadn't more than taken a bite of that, whatever it was. We call it an apple. We don't know if it was an apple or not. Could have been an orange. Could have been a plum. Doesn't make any difference. It was forbidden fruit. And I bet you as soon as they took a bite of that and as soon as they tasted, they realized the mistake they had made. You ever been there? You ever been there? You ever made a decision, acted on something, and realized as soon as you had done it, you made the wrong decision? I've been there many times. I've heard people say that have survived suicide. There's a bridge up in Knoxville, Tennessee, that goes across. I believe it's Holston River. I'm not quite sure. I can't remember the name of the river. And a lot of people jump off of this bridge. It's a swift flowing current. There's a restaurant that's right there by it. City Hall's right next to it. You can watch the bridge. And a friend of mine who used to work there watched a man jump off that bridge into the water. Fortunately, he did survive. And when they pulled him out, he said, the minute I jumped off that bridge, I was sorry that I had done it. You see, some people may be sorry that they made that decision to commit suicide, but it's too late. They sometimes don't survive. So they ate the fruit. And part of what Satan told them was true. There's always some truth in a lie. They did become wise. Their eyes were opened. But they also died spiritually. They became separated from God. See, that's what sin does. Sin separates you and me from God. And that's what happened to them. That relationship they had with God before their disobedience was gone. And in and of themselves, they could not restore it. Saw a picture once of Adam and Eve after they'd been kicked out of the garden. God set up the angel there. It had 4 figures and it just kept turning. You know, it just turned. A flame, a flaming angel. No way they could get back in. That's why Christ came. John Milton wrote 2 poems about it. Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. Lust. The Joseph story is a good example. But in that story, it is not Joseph's lust. That's the problem. It's the lust of Potiphar's wife, his master's wife. She's got the hots for Joseph. Got a young-looking young man. I mean, probably maybe late teens, early 20s. She's a middle-aged woman, beginning to wrinkle a little bit, has to use more makeup every day she gets up to look better. She wants to be revived. She wants to be noticed. She wants to regain that allure that she once had, and Joseph becomes the opposite of her affections. Listen at his battle argument against it. It's an abuse of the great trust placed in me by his master, Potiphar. It's an offense against her husband. It's a great sin against God. Millennia after the Joseph story, Peter comes along and cautions the church with this message. Be sober. Be alert. Be aware. Know what's going on around you. Have your feet on the ground. Be vigilant. Because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Now we know that's in there. You quote it, I quote it, we remember it. But it is true. It's not just words written on a page in Scripture. It is true. To the Romans, Paul would write, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. Among them is the lust of their hearts. And God has given them up to their uncleanness, ungodliness, and unrighteousness. And I look at our world, and I look at what's going on in our world, and I remember Paul's words, and I ask myself, is that where we are? Has God given us up to our depravity? Lust is a tool of the Satan that entraps the soul of humanity and lures us to commit all kinds of unrighteousness, ungodly acts against each other. And sometimes they result in the heinous crime of murder. And it seems that women are often the victims of someone else's lust. Every time I drive down Carolina Bay's Parkway, we call it 31, and I get down to Water Tower Road exit, I remember Alice Donovan. Some of you may remember her when you drive that way. Lust is a weakness of the human personality, and Satan uses it because he's a bully. At every opportunity he gets to exploit and use it against his intended victim and our victims. Worry. You worry? Some people worry because they don't have anything to worry about. We're familiar with the term worry wart. I worry. worry about things. I worry about that. I try not to, but I worry about things. Now I recognize that's kind of a silly question to ask you. Creates stress, high blood pressure, ulcers, strokes. And often the things that we worry about are things that we can't do anything about, and we waste all of that valuable time and energy and effort of living just to worry. And some of the things we worry about, we can do something about, and the way to get away from the worry is to do what we can do to solve the problem. And don't worry about it. We may not want to do it, but it may be in our best interest to do it. Worry was a problem for Adam and Eve, because they disobeyed God, and they realized what they had done. And you know what they discovered? They discovered nakedness. They discovered nakedness. Makes me always wonder, you know, the first news colony happened in the Garden of Eden. Think about that. Pristine innocence. Pristine innocence. And they seemed to understand, they didn't seem to understand that they were naked until after they'd done it. Well, they attempted to correct it, of course, by sewing together themselves some fig leaves. I don't know, I guess fig leaves might work. My question was, well, I'm sure they didn't use thread. They used some kind of little bind to weave together some kind of a fig leaf thing and wrap it around their waist. And then God comes up and says, where are you? They're hiding from God. They're ashamed. They're afraid. See, it creates fear. Fear. When you do something wrong, it creates fear. When you know you've done it wrong, it creates fear. You know why? Because you know you're afraid somebody else will find out. And you worry about it. You don't want anybody to find out. You don't want anybody to find out because they might think you're stupid. Where are you? Oh, we were hiding. Why are you hiding? Because we were naked. Who told you you were naked? You see, I find that an interesting little story. Who told you you were naked? Now, personally, I think I would have enjoyed the Garden of Eden. You know, clothes sometimes are a hindrance. Who told you you were naked? Well, you know what God did? He took away the fig leaves, killed a little innocent animal. Somebody says the first murder in the Bible, to provide for them some more substantial clothing. Well, see, they were hiding from God. One of the most ridiculous things that you and I attempt to do is to hide things from God. It's silly to try to do that. You and I know it. It would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. Well, what about bondage? You ever felt as though you were in bondage in something, a debt, illness, addiction, relationship? Bondage. Bondage. You know, I hate to say this, but you'll think bad, but anyway, you get the idea. There is a practice in the world of pornography called bondage. I read that somewhere. Called bondage. People like to be in bondage and have somebody else beat on them. Now that is really stupid. That is really bad. You can find people in all of these categories. You may even know somebody in one of these categories. Bondage paralyzes a person to the point that they become immobilized and they cannot do anything. They cannot act. They can't make decisions. They are stuck. In the book of Judges, which covers about 500 years of Hebrew history, and it is filled with stories of recurring periods of freedom and recurring periods of bondage. Here's the refrain that runs throughout the book of Judges. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. That was most often their problem. A fertility cult. Baals. Pagan gods. Hear, O Israel, and they've been warned about it before they ever got there, and here's the warning. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with the totality of your being. Subsumed in that statement is the idea that there are pagan gods to which they have the potential to succumb. And implied in that is they're to worship no God other than the Hebrew God. Israel was held in bondage 400 years. 400 plus years. In fact, you know the interesting thing about that? Before it ever happened, God told Abraham, before it ever happened, Abraham, your people are going to be in bondage 400 years. It depends on whose text you follow, 400, 430 years. But it's a long time. They didn't have to be in bondage, I don't think. I really don't think they had to be in bondage. We know why they were. The famine came along and Joseph takes his mother and his father and brings them to Egypt. Pharaoh invites them, and oh, come on down. Give you the best spot we've got. Go over and settle in the land of Goshen. It's a veritable paradise. You see, they didn't have to do that. They weren't supposed to do that. They were never supposed to be in Egypt. You could continue to trade with Egypt and buy grain. You just had to travel down there to get it. And in that 400 years, Israel was stymied from being what God had promised Abraham she would be, a great nation. Bondage stymies one individual or a group of individuals' life. One of the great bondage problems we've got in our society right now is drugs, particularly heroin addiction. In America in 2016, approximately 64,000 people died due to overdose of drugs. In 2015, approximately 55,000 died. In 2017, it was even worse. So in those 3 years, somewhere between 150 to probably 180,000 people died in America due to drugs. A soldier gets killed in Afghanistan in war. It makes national news, and it breaks our heart. It does. Breaks my heart every time I hear about one of our soldiers being killed in battle. He went there voluntarily. He was sent there because he was ordered to go, but he joined the army because that's what he felt like he wanted to do. And he gave his life for his country. And it is a tragic thing when we lose one of our soldiers. We lose this many people due to drug overdoses. And it's just a statistic. We're not too much appalled about it. We don't worry about it too much. And it's a blight on society that is devastating, that is costly. I could say a lot more here, but I'm not going to. I think the drug heroin is the idol god of the 21st century. And people worship at his altar because they are in bondage to him. And it's in all classes of individuals. The rich, the poor, the middle class, the upper class, the haves, the has-nots. It just doesn't make any difference as far as Satan is concerned, and it demonstrates how much of a bully he really can be. One last thing I want to talk about is confusion. A lot of us go around confused all the time, right?
Amen.
I mean, I go around my house confused all the time, I never know what my wife wants me to do. Confused. I never know what I want to do myself. Confusion. Satan uses it as one of his tools. It happens when there's a lack of understanding and the assurance of certainty. It comes about. It comes about lack of truthfulness or knowing what is right or wrong. It seems to me that the country is confused on a lot of things. See, we're confused about this thing about, I'm going to say this, I wasn't going to, but I'm going to say this to you. I think you need to know this. The country is confused about this thing called transgender. You see, you're either born XX or XY. There's no such thing as transgender.
Right.
There's no XXY or XYY. You see, the only chromosome aberration that I'm most familiar with is mongoloidism, Down syndrome. Happens in the 21st chromosome pairs when they don't separate properly. Paul's message to the church at Corinth was this: God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. Where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and evil and every evil thing are there, says James to his congregation. Where envy and self-seeking. I don't know anyone more self-seeking than Satan and are his minions. You know what a minion of Satan is? Anyone who chooses to serve him rather than to serve God. And that includes a lot of people. Seems to me that we're living in a very confused world. Satan is behind it because, as Paul said to the church at Corinth, he is the God of this age. He really is. He really, really is. Churches exist all over the country and all over the world. I looked at some churches on television, huge congregations. But the church is minuscule in terms of the total population of this country. 300 million plus people. There are millions who never darken the church door. There are millions who never want to darken the church door. There are millions who could care less about God, about the church. They make fun of Christianity. It is the most denigrated religion, and I don't use that term rather loosely, in America. An old fogey idea. But I believe that when Jesus Christ appears in the clouds at his second coming, that idea is going to change very quickly, and it may be too late for many. Paul described the people of his day thusly: the gospel is veiled to those who are perishing. Did you get that? The gospel is veiled to those who are perishing. I must finish up here. Hang with me just a couple more minutes. Whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. I think it's a pretty accurate description of our world and our time. And all of this is perpetuated by Satan, the bully. We're going to stand and sing our hymn of invitation, and maybe you need to come and pray about some issue going on in your life or your family's life. Maybe there's some decision that you need to make for Christ and God and his kingdom, and I invite you to do that. Come talk about it. Come pray about it.